Okay, here we are now at the very beginning of the demo. And at this point, I was talking somewhat about the things that you might need to bring with you. This is a retractable eraser, which I try not to use anymore than I absolutely have to. I like to get the drawing down first. There are some other things here too that I'm showing. Uh, that's showing you how the retractable eraser works. We have a few other things here. We have a little bag here, which I carry all of my uh, pens, retractable pencils, erasers, clips, and so on. I think this is, I've got a little clip in my hand, and this is what we like to use when you are out painting outside. You need to hold your papers down because sure enough, if you don't, when you have a wash on your paper and the wind catches it, it flips it over, it's going to mess everything up. So you need some type of clip like this to put on your journal to keep several of the uh, pages clipped together so they'll be heavy enough where they won't blow in the wind. You can also see here that I have a paper towel behind the page that I'm going to be working on, because a lot of times the paint will spill over behind it and mess up the page behind it. So that's one of the other things that you absolutely need to do, have a piece of paper towel there behind the sheet that you're working on. This is just a showing one of the demos that I had done in Costa Rica. It's on that page, it was just there. Now we are talking also about how to lay out some of the subject matter on the paper. This is using a retractable pencil, and this goes back to what I said in the very beginning. You try to do a 1 minute drawing. You are in a situation where you don't have a whole lot of time. Might be with a group. You might have to get back to the boat. You may have to get back to the bus. You may need to make your spouse back for supper, a lot of different things. You've got to move fast. So this is where you are going to have to get this down quickly. And part of the way I try to teach this is look for the center of interest in the subject matter that you're looking at out in real life. Look for that center of interest. Work from that. Don't try to copy everything. Don't put everything in there, but start off with your center of interest on the paper, with keeping the rule of thirds or golden mean in mind, and work from there, work out. Too many times people will start off and begin to put their subject matter down, draw it in. It's in the wrong place. They start erasing. They start to draw it again. It's too big. They erase again. This, to me, is the easiest way to do it, starting off in the center of interest and then working out from there. Also remembering to not put everything in there. We'll be working in a minute from a photograph that I took in Provence, which should come up on the screen shortly. But it's a lot easier to work from a photograph because you already have your composition pretty well worked out in the photograph if you've taken the photograph correctly. But too many times people look at what's in front of them. They're overwhelmed by what's out in front of them. They need to condense this down and look for just the main part of the subject matter there. Eliminate what doesn't need to be in there, move trees around if you've got to, and take it from there. Now I've got, let's see, the bag that I'm handling there now is one of the bags that I carry all of my painting equipment in. This is where we were running into problems with the audio, and obviously it didn't work. So now I'm getting out some of the photographs that I had that as I referred to, and this is also a tool that you might want to use. It's a acetate with the rule of thirds, shown on there, and you can hold this up and look at it, move it back and forth, closer to your eye, further away. Put the center of interest on one of those intersections where the rule of thirds cross, and this will help you frame it in. I don't take this with me and use it. I bring it along to my class just for people to help to, they can borrow this and use this, and it helps them frame it in properly. I use the same thing literally just in my mind as I look at this, and picture that in my mind as I look at the subject matter. So that's one of the tools that you can also use. They do have also the other one that I don't think that we had out, the other little tool was one that shows the contrast, and it's just a darker color acetate. You hold it over there and it'll show where your lights and darks are. Now, this is the photograph that we'll be working from. And this is from when I was on a trip to Provence, and this was a vineyard. And obviously you can see by the color of the grapevines that it's at the end of the season when they're starting to turn colors, which is actually a whole lot more attractive, prettier than just the green that you would see earlier on. But they had their own chapels out in the middle of the vineyard. And this is one that I've had for a while. And I said, well, this would be a good one to do a demo on. And so we'll be starting off with this shortly and showing you how to do the quick 1-minute drawings or less. And this is not perfectly centered. I'm going to, on this particular picture, I've decided, because of the format that I'm working in here on this size paper, that I'm going to move the building, the chapel, down a little bit and have more sky and less of the foreground, and bring that down somewhat. Obviously, too, you can see some things in there that I might leave out. There's a modern telephone pole right literally to the left of the chapel. We're going to leave that out. One thing I do like about this, one reason I chose this, is that literally I did take several photographs of this, and this just happened to be the one I think that worked the best. But literally the chapel is framed by the darker trees there. And it's set about 1/3 of the way from the right picture plane. There is a gate that you go in. I'm going to move the gate over, that white gate that's on the right side. I'm going to move that over a little bit to where it overlaps the chapel instead of coming right up to the edge of it, creating a tangent. And you'll see a lot of the tombstones and crosses there in the little cemetery. I'm going to put some of those in there just to break up that line along the fence line. Okay, we're talking about some of these same things right now, but we will get into the drawing very shortly here. And you'll also see, well, before we get into that, you'll see that I just carry a little cup over there, which is just literally something that I could lose and not be too excited about. They have collapsible water bowls that you can carry that take up less space. And you'll see over there too, there's a paper towel on my paint tray, which is a very small paint tray. It's a Mielo travel palette. But what I do when I'm working outside, I also have that water bowl on top of that paper towel, because your paper towel is going to blow away. Okay, we're starting the drawing here now, and I'm pointing out some of the things that we're going to be doing. And basically, you'll see that I'll be starting out here with getting the building, which is obviously my center of interest. And I'm talking here about perhaps moving down the center of interest a little bit further down where it is in the photograph. And we'll be starting on doing the drawing here very quickly. But you'll see what I do here. Start with the building. Now, the hardest thing that people have is getting their perspective right. I just, the week after the Florida Watercolor Workshop, I did a workshop in Havana, Florida with the Tallahassee Watercolor. We spent 2 days outside doing this exact same thing. And I told everybody, you're going to have problems with perspective. And sure enough, this is exactly what happened. It's to be expected. Very few people have this natural thing to be able to put perspective in. So I had to work back and forth with literally everybody, trying to get them to show how your lines of perspective need to meet up at the theoretical horizon line. And this was it was an interesting group up there, but we had a great time. By the second day, people would begin to get this. But you see how I just sort of frame in the center of interest here. And I've moved over that fence, as I said earlier, to where it overlaps the building. And literally, this is all you need in the drawing. Any other detail that you might put in, like the windows, any other shapes, the door on the chapel, you can put that in later with a pen and ink. You might add some of it in there. Now, right now, to me, one of the important things here is to paint this or draw in this cross that's on the end of the chapel. And we'll leave that as a white shape and paint around it to bring it out. That helps draw a little bit more detail on your center of interest. There, I'm coming along the top of the fence and just putting in some shapes that might look like the tops of the tombstones, crosses, and so on there. So that's basically all you want to do. And to the right, you can see sort of the palette here on the screen. I think I'll show it later and where people can get a better look at it. You don't have to have a whole lot of different colors on something like this. It's basically, I could probably paint with, I could make do with 6, 8, 10 colors if I even had that many. Here, I just come in there. I don't completely wet the paper, but I do the sky first almost always. And I'll just partially wet it. And what we're going to do in this case, the sky in this photograph is just sort of a monotone, one value. That's not what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and make the sky darker at the top, leave clouds surrounding the darker trees. So I'll be going from darker sky to lighter sky where the clouds are, to darker trees, to lighter buildings. So I go back and forth between the lights and the darks. The other thing that people make a mistake in too often is they know the old adage, the sky is blue, the grass is green. So what they do is that they just make a puddle of blue, one color, and the sky is nothing but one color, and generally one value. I never do a sky with just one type of blue, and sometimes you'll see in a little while I'll even throw in a little bit of another color, like it's one of the reds, to make some purples in there. But you can also sort of lift this out, soften the edges. I'll keep pushing these darks here, as one instructor told me many years ago, if it looks right when it's wet, it's wrong. And I think that's a good thing to remember. You do have to, talking about working with this as wet as I'm doing here, you do have to have, in your journal, you do need to have at least 140-pound paper. Don't get cheap paper. Okay, there I'm going back in and adding some rose madder to it, just for a little bit of emphasis there, breaking it up a little bit. We're going to come in here in a minute and lift out that little run that's coming down out of the clouds, and soften some of those edges. We'll leave the edges of the clouds a little bit harder edged over the center of interest where the trees are, soften them further away. Create the hardest edges, the most detail around your center of interest. I'll go back in there and lift that. I'm going to come in here now and soften some of these edges out away from from where the center of interest is. And push a little bit more darker color in there. Remembering if it looks right when it's wet, it's wrong. Push a little bit more in there. This is still going to dry very light. And when we get to the end of it, you'll see how much lighter it's going to be. But that's why you need to push the color deeper. Okay, and here again, we'll soften some of those edges along in there, away from the center of interest. Then what we're going to do is start working down away from that, so that can dry up there a little bit. When you're working quickly on this and you don't have a whole lot of time, you got to figure out, okay, I'm going to do this part first, then this part, then I'll touch this into it. I may want to have the tree line sort of lost into the sky, so I may touch the the tree line into the wet paint of the sky. All depends on what you're looking to do. But in this case, I'll start working at the bottom. That top part's going to still be wet for a while. And I'll start beginning to do this. Now you see, I don't just come in here and paint a solid color over all of these areas. I'm leaving pieces of white in there. You want to utilize as much of the white paper as you can. You'll see here, then we'll start coming down here and mixing some other colors. As I look at those, the old vines, grapevines in there, I see everything from yellows to greens to rust colors to reds. So this is what I'll just sort of mix together there, but gradually build it up, keep working that together. And touching a little bit of the greens in there. A lot of people, you know, every time in any workshop, people always say, well, what color did you use to do this? And yeah, that's not as important. I don't try to tell people to go out and buy certain colors. I think this is not necessarily as much a class in how to paint as it is to what to look for, how to get it down quickly on the paper, and use whatever colors you're familiar with. So don't worry too much about what colors I may or may not be using in this situation. So this one, I will mention though that this green that I'm putting in is a green apatite by Daniel Smith, and it's a sedimentary color. So it is one that you know, you can easily soften and blend, put on top of others. It's a very easy paint to work with. Here again, we'll start on that background now with a tree line, and we'll put this in very light to start with, and then start building up some darker colors on top of that, just like we did on the bottom. The trees behind the chapel will obviously go in a little bit darker. We're going to get to that here very shortly, but I'm just sort of building this up gradually. You'll see that I'm going to leave some of these tombstones along the fence line. I'll leave it light there. Some of those I will bring out with a little bit of pen and ink at the end. We'll see that as we go further along. And a lot of times I will put colors in there that like this that you may not see that, but it allows for some variation. And also I don't mind accentuating the colors, maybe more color there than might otherwise be there. But I don't depend so much on color as I do the value changes and shapes. Anything that when I'm looking at something to paint, it's got to have interesting highlights, interesting shadows, and interesting shapes. And if it's got that, you can make a good painting out of almost anything that you see out there in the plein air. It does not have to be something that's absolutely totally fancy. In fact, some of the simplest ones that I've done that I finished the most quickly were the ones that I felt happiest with and more satisfied with. We'll keep building these shapes up, and the paint at the top you can see still has a little bit of sheen on it, so it's not quite dry, but it's essentially done as far as I'm concerned. We'll keep working on the trees here and the foreground. But this is see, I'm not just when I make that fence, I'm not just making a solid line in there. I'm leaving some interruption, leave some white spaces or some lighter spaces in there. And we do that. I think in a minute we'll be working on some of those trees in the background behind the chapel, and you'll see how that suddenly starts to bring that out. And you can just gradually keep building these up, but I'm still working fairly wet in these. You are sometimes running into problems when you get into some place. I was in France years ago when they had their worst heat wave in history. I think they may be having another one now, but it was 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was out trying with almost 10% relative humidity. And as soon as you wet the paper and put the pigment down on it, it just soaked into the paper. You couldn't move it, you couldn't wet it, you couldn't blend it. So I found out that was a real challenge. And other days, if it's really humid in some places, it takes forever for you to get the paper dry. And so you got two different extremes that can really add to the challenges. I've had a lot of times where the humidity was so high that you couldn't, no matter what you did, you couldn't close the book. You just have to carry the book back with you for wherever you're going back, the ship or the bus, whatever, and hold it open, let it dry, because the humidity was so high it would not dry. So you have to face that situation too. Okay, we are. Let's see. Yeah, now we're going to start pushing some of the darkers here. Now this looks like I'm probably, just people are always curious, taking a little bit of that green apatite with some ultramarine blue. Both of those are sedimentary colors, and both of them can be lifted, blended easily later on, softened if you needed to. You usually don't worry too much about doing anything like that in these drawings. It's pretty much, you put it down, it's the way it is. It also goes back to, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, do you ever have one of them that you just really didn't turn out, you don't like, and you want to tear it out of your journal? And there's been some other people, I think, including Ian Stewart, who've said, don't ever tear it out of your journal. It's a learning experience. So, save it, put it in there, look at it. Okay, yeah, it may not be as good as some others that you've done, but don't worry about it. You've learned from it. So don't do one that you feel like you got to tear out. I mean, there's a lot of them in these journals that I have sitting out here this morning for people to look at. There's some of them in there that are certainly not as good as the others. But don't ever tear them out and throw them away. Keep them there as a learning experience. You see what we've done here, though, too, is that we're leaving some sky holes to show through this tree instead of just painting all solid green. And we're coming down here to where that fence is, or gate, and we're going to leave, and see right there, I'll just sort of paint a negative shape in there, a little crosses or something behind there. That just adds a little bit more. I mean, that only takes a split second to do. Adds a little bit more interest to the things. Helps emphasize that what you're looking at is a little church or a chapel. And then you can still kind of come up in here and then go over that yellow and vermilion, crimson color there a little bit. Push it a little bit darker, but you still have some of those colors showing through, which adds a little bit more interest to it. So you have a little bit of warm in that cool green. So, and then gradually build this up. And so you begin to see how the shape, you're building up the darker shapes around the center of interest. And you can, if you don't like the outline of what you've done with some of the shape of the tree, you can still push the colors around a little bit and alter your shape a little bit. Kind of like what I'm doing there now. And just emphasizing more and more, that helps bring out the center of interest. Darkest darks, lightest lights, hardest edges, most detail. And we'll keep bringing the darker greens and shapes down there to help silhouette that chapel. So I'm doing a little bit more reshaping up there. Put a few little marks in here to break up that other fence on the other side. And we'll keep working some of these darks. We're going to go a little bit darker here in a while with that fence along on the left side, going from the left picture plane into the chapel. We're going to darken that a little bit more. And we're going to do a little bit more darks to break up that tree line in the back, some darker greens, leaving some of the lights to show through. So we're going to be doing that just a short while here. Yep. But you can see how this begins to come out. And you can see I haven't drawn in even the door to the chapel. There's looks like I don't know if it's a window up above it or just something ornamental thing in the stonework. I'm not sure. But we're also going to leave, you'll see in a little while here, you'll leave some of the highlights on the gable ends of the chapel too, which will also help bring out some of the detail too. But this is, let's see. I'm getting a little bit ahead of my work here, so we just have to wait a second and we'll see see where it's going. Okay. Yeah, this is where we come back in and start putting some of the darker greens in on top of those lighter greens. Tying it together. Here again, you don't come in here and just paint a light color and then cover it completely up with a darker color. Leave some of the lighter colors to show through. And, it's just a good rule of thumb to remember. Don't put it down and then cover it all up. Leave some of the underlying lighter colors to show through. This helps give you some depth or three dimension in this, in your picture. And then you can come back in here once you got that green apatite mainly in there and touch some yellows back into it, and it just runs right into that green apatite. We'll do a little bit more detail on this fence in front here, and then we'll get into the building in a minute. You'll see what I'm talking about there with leaving some of the highlights on the ends of the gables, the roof line. While we're waiting on that, I don't think at some point in time at the beginning, I did talk about the types of journals that you can get. Stillman and Burns is probably one of the best ones. It's the most expensive. There's some others out there. If you want to go to the top of the line, go with the Stillman and Burns. They make different sizes. They make them where they're bound, where you can open them up and paint across the middle, or they make them spiral bound, which I prefer because you can flip them over and it's a little bit more convenient. I've worked a lot of times doing one of these, holding it in my hand. I didn't have a place to sit it down, and it folding over on itself. I think makes that a little bit more convenient as far as holding on to it. So that's one of the things that I would recommend, which we didn't cover earlier. And now we're going to get back into doing a little bit more here. We'll bring some of that. We're making just sort of random shapes in here that will look like something in the cemetery there, the graveyard with the tombstones there. And now, this is where we'll come in. You see, I'll leave a little bit of light on that gable end that's sticking up. We can say the light's hitting that, so we'll put that in. And then that's sort of a gray color because I think they were using a slate roof on these. A lot of these buildings over there that I was in Italy one time, and was driving around and stopped and found this old building and did a painting of it. And it turns out it was a chicken coop because it was full of chickens. And it literally had to be 200 years old, but made out of stone and slate roof. And it was last forever. So a lot of these buildings here, like this one, this building is probably 100, 150 years old. I wouldn't really say, but it obviously had tombstones going back for a long time, back for probably all the owners of the vineyard. And, that goes back a long ways. But you see, I've left on the gable ends there. That helps bring out some of the shapes of the little chapel there. Here, I don't worry too much about making really exact lines in there as far as that fence. And I'm literally leaving it as a negative shapes for the fence. And you see it starts to bring the building out here. I'll leave some lights up there just above where that doorway that I'm painting now. I'll leave some lights up there, and then I'll come back in with a pen and ink and do just enough to give the suggestion of that structure or whatever it is, window over the door. And I'm pushing the darks here a little bit more on that fence line. And we'll getting very close to the end of it here. And the other thing too, we were talking earlier about the types of pen that I use, and there's a lot of them out there, but the ones that I use are Statler, and I use the 0.3 and 0.5 tip. And the reason I ended up using those, I had several others. Here I'm coming in just with a pen and outlining, help bringing out that little cross on the front a little bit more. This will help bring out some of the thing. But you'll see this is all in live time. So it hadn't been that long since I painted on this. And a lot of this paper is still damp. And I can use that Statler pen on damp paper. Most pens will not work on damp paper. You can't get the ink to flow. The other thing is that once you get it on there, it's waterproof. It's not going to, if you wanted to come back over this and do some, a little bit more, you could do a little bit more of the, you could do a little bit more work with this. See, I'll bring out that detail on that. And we'll keep working on some of that, bring out some of the shapes of the tombstones in there. A little bit on that fence. Okay, we keep working on this and just come down here and do the same thing along the fence line, put another little cross in there to indicate something in the cemetery, and keep bringing that out. We're getting, and you see, you don't need a whole lot of detail in something like this. Gradually, I'm just putting just dash marks in there for the bottom of the fence. You don't need to put in continuous lines. And we're getting not much more here to go. As I say, the Statler pen is one that is best for working on damp paper. A lot of times this is really helps a lot when you've got to work fast and trying to get this done. Some cases where it's really humid and it stays wet, so wet, that's where you might have to carry it back with you, and you might have to come back in here and do some of the pen and ink later after your page dries. But here again, a lot of people get in this and want to outline everything. You don't need to, just a little bit of marks here. It's just like doing watercolors. You've heard the term make your brush dance. This is a good situation where you make the pen dance. Just move it around squiggly, does not have to be perfectly straight lines. And you're just doing this for some interest accent marks. We are pretty close, I think, here being done as far as the demo.